Spirituality 101 is basically this: there is a God, and it's not you. There is a God, and it's not you or me. God is God, and that means He's completely self-sufficient. Strictly speaking, God, who is the creator, doesn't need anything. You and I do. You and I have needs that we have to take care of if we're going to thrive or even survive. We are the created. Our whole being, our whole life is filled with never-ending moments of neediness. Just think about all the needs you have. You have physical needs. You need oxygen, food, and water. Then there are your emotional and mental health needs. You have a need to be understood, a need for acceptance and encouragement. You need self-confidence and self-esteem. You need meaning and purpose. You need to work and rest. The list goes on and on and on. And on top of all those needs, you have spiritual needs. You and I are needy. That's how God has created us. In addition, He gives us free will and passes on to us the responsibility to take care of many of those needs. And taking care of your needs first is the most important responsibility you have. That may at first sound selfish, but it's just common sense. You can't help anybody until you've taken care of yourself, and if you don't, eventually you'll become somebody else's problem. Well, on the other hand, when you do take care of your own needs, you'll be more effective in caring for others. If you have any kind of responsibility, taking care of your needs is first essential. 50% of leadership is self-leadership. If you're a parent or a teacher or a coach, if you're a manager, a supervisor, or if you're running a small business, if you're a team captain or just a good friend, leadership begins with self-leadership. Jesus Himself teaches us this. One time, a scribe of the law asked Him, "What is the greatest commandment?" And Jesus replied, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself." As yourself. So Jesus teaches that even our very ability to love others rests first and foremost on our loving care for ourselves. You know, we probably don't deny all of our needs all of the time, but sometimes, really because of our fallen nature, we all have a tendency to do so. There have been times when you knew you needed help with something, and it wasn't until the pain or the problem got so great that you finally took care of that need yourself or you got help. When we deny even just one of our legitimate needs, we're not moving toward health. We're actually moving away from it. So this Lenten series that we're doing is about looking at just how needy we are, how to best meet those needs, and as a result, how to be healthier. Well, last week we talked about some of the temptations we face when it comes to our needs. The first temptation, meeting legitimate needs in illegitimate ways. We'll be tempted sometime to do something we know is wrong in order to meet a real need. And second temptation, meeting legitimate needs through shortcuts. With our needs, we're often tempted to settle for what is kind of a shadow of the real and legitimate need we experience, and to go for the shortcut and try to take the easy way out. The third temptation, meeting our needs by worshiping them. We turn our needs into our gods to make them the whole of our life, to give to them our attention, our affection, and our ability to pursue them at all costs. Oh, this past week I've been thinking and praying about the many potential needs of people in our church and in our community right now in this reality of COVID-19. Like the need to find work because you've been out of work. A need to take care of a health issue that's been put off for the past year. A need to see your grandkids whom you haven't seen in over a year. A need to change scenery because of depression or of just cabin fever. I need to see friends or to make new friends. I need to start exercising again. I need to escape a toxic environment at work or at home. A need to deal with that anger problem that's just gotten worse and worse. Or just a need for daily perseverance, to shovel snow again. Or to just survive homeschooling your kids toward the end of this school year. Well, today we want to talk about our greatest need of all, our greatest need ever, which is, of course, our need for God. Now, some of you might be thinking, of course he's going to say that. He's the church guy, and this is church world. What else would he say? But you might also be saying, if our greatest need is for God, then why don't I feel that need more deeply or perhaps really at all? Why isn't my need for God a kind of felt need? Why don't we wake up every morning with some kind of deep felt desire to connect with God? I'll be honest. One of my first heart's desires in the morning isn't God, but that warm, delicious cup of coffee, especially the first one. We can go long periods of time really without talking to God or even thinking about Him at all. Even for quote-unquote professional prayers like me, a habit of prayer can just honestly sometimes feel like an effort or an empty routine, and certainly not a need. And on top of that, you look around and there are these people we all know who seem to have it all together. They're happy, they have a good job and a great family, and God isn't part of their lives. They don't seem to ever pray. Where's their need for God? So we're going to look to answer those questions by turning to one of the most well-known stories in the Bible, the story of Abraham. Abraham is called our father in faith, and not just for Christians. He's considered a father or an ancestor in three of the world's major religions: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. When we're first introduced to Abraham in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, we learn that he's married to his wife Sarah, and they have no children. Well, being childless was considered a curse in ancient cultures. And both Abraham, who's called Abram at the beginning of the story, and Sarah, his wife, are advanced in years. They're well beyond childbearing years and don't have kids, so their situation just seems hopeless. Well, at the beginning of his story in Genesis chapter 12, God calls out to him and chooses to form a relationship with him. He says to Abram, "Go forth from your land, your relatives, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. All the families of the earth will find blessing in you." Well, God makes these three amazing promises. If Abram steps out in faith as God asks him to do, God promises three things. First, God will make him a nation, that is, many, many descendants, as many as the stars of the sky and grains of sand on the seashore. And second, God will make his name great, that is, one of his descendants will establish a royal dynasty. And third, God will make him a worldwide blessing. All the families of the earth will find blessing through his descendants. Now, the Bible doesn't record Abram's thinking or how he feels. Obviously, none of these amazing promises could happen without him first having a son. But Abram goes out anyway. He goes forth and leaves the comfort of his hometown because he's going to get something. Abraham trusts God, kind of. It's like if some stranger came to you and promised that you'd win the lottery if you just move out of your house. Would you do it? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe this is kind of like your own story. You're connecting with church right now in this moment, in all honesty, not because you have this great deep relationship with God yet, but because you need something from Him. In the midst of this pandemic, it's about all those felt needs. Your job, your kids, your husband, your health. You know what? That's okay. God accepts us however and whenever we're willing to come to Him. So Abram's the same way here. God promises him a son, step out in faith, and he does so sort of. There's a little caveat. The Bible tells us Abram went as the Lord directed him, and Lot went with him. Well, who's Lot? Lot is his nephew. In other words, Abram obeys God, but he's kind of playing his bets. He's minimizing the risk by taking with him his nephew just in case he really doesn't get that son. This is what we see throughout Abram's story. He believes in God and he does what God says, kind of. Abraham is our father in faith, but if you really read the story closely, you'll see that he's far from the perfect father. Well, I don't know about you, but I find this encouraging, actually. You see, we don't have to wait for perfect faith to follow God. In the story, Abram will look for shortcuts from time to time in his lack of faith, but eventually he grows in faith. God gives him a son, Isaac. And the birth of his son, Isaac, then brings the greatest challenge of all, which we heard about in today's first reading. So we pick up near the end of the story of Abraham in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, chapter 22. And by this point, God has formalized his promises of blessings by making with him a covenant. And as part of that solemn covenant, his name is now changed to Abraham. Here's God's great big challenge. God says to Abraham, take your son Isaac, your only one whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. There you shall offer him as a holocaust. A holocaust is a burnt offering. In other words, God is asking Abraham to take his only son, the very son through whom all these promises of blessing hang on, to tie him down to a pile of wood, kill him, and burn the body as an offering to the Lord. Sounds pretty gruesome, right? This is, of course, shocking that God would ask him to do this, but it's even more shocking as the next verse tells us that Abraham actually set out to do it. Now, it's important when we hear a gruesome story like this in the Bible not to insert anything that's not there, like Abraham's emotions or what the boy Isaac might be thinking, this boy who's presumably 12 or 13. You see, the Bible doesn't really work that way. Instead, just focus on the one main point. The story shows in a dramatic way how much Abraham's faith has increased. Abraham and Isaac make their way to the place for the sacrifice, and as they go, the boy asks his father, here are the fire and the wood, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? Abraham answers, God will provide the sheep for the burnt offering. God will provide. So there's another indication of faith and trust. God will provide. Then the story concludes. Abraham bound Isaac and laid him on the altar. Then he reached out and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the Lord's messenger called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham, do not lay your hand on the boy. Do not do the least thing to him. I know now how devoted you are to God, since you did not withhold from me your own beloved son. So this is, of course, a crazy story, but it has a very clear point. God has led Abraham to this place of incredible faith and trust. And he led him, in a way, through Abraham's own neediness, his need and his lack of faith, to see God's promises of blessings fulfilled, most especially in the promise of a son. Abraham had seen God give him Isaac. And now, finally, Abraham's learned in faith to trust God so much that he's willing to do anything God asks him. Thus, he's known in history as our father in faith. So, my friends, why can we miss out on our need for God sometimes? If you don't have that felt need for God right now, it's probably because you're meeting it in some other way. You know, God will allow certain things to happen in our lives to redirect that need back to Him. Often it's when, our physical or emotional needs are so urgent, that's when we realize how much we need Him. Maybe that's happened to you during this pandemic. Maybe because of the reality of COVID, it's actually easier for you to have that felt need for God. And as I said, whatever way you come to God, that's okay. If previously we've been ignoring Him and meeting our needs in illegitimate ways or by looking for shortcuts, or even by worshiping all those needs, maybe now is the time to take that leap of faith and trust, like Abraham, to deepen our relationship with Him. Oh, here's just a simple encouragement for the coming week. In the morning, begin each day as soon as you can think of it and simply say, God, I need you. God, I need you. Just say that every day for the next week. Just saying it, you'll already be living in a greater recognition of your greatest need. You see, my friends, knowing your needs and taking the time to meet them is not selfish. It's living in the reality that we are children of God. He made us needy so that eventually we'll come to understand our greatest need is Him.